The write-up on NATO's website calls founding member Denmark a strategic giant. And yes, the location of the small country and its overseas territories, including a very large one, finds Denmark on some of the most strategic areas in Northern Europe, the North Atlantic, and the Arctic. What makes Denmark so strategic? What does Denmark have to defend itself and to contribute to the defense of its allies? What urgent issues does Denmark face in terms of defense? Denmark is lodged in the crossroads between Europe's main continental mass and the Scandinavian peninsula. Denmark's peninsula, islands, and waterways, or the Danish Straits, lie between the enclosed Baltic Sea and the North Sea, which expands into the waters of the North Atlantic. The Kingdom of Denmark is composed of Denmark proper in Europe and its two self-governing territories, Greenland and the Faroe Islands. The first thing you'll probably notice when you see Denmark on a map is the peninsula that juts out of the Central European landmass, which, fittingly in English, is called Jutland. It's Jutland in Danish, or people known as the Utes who once lived there. The upper two-thirds of Jutland is the continental part of Denmark. A majority of the Danish people live on islands east of the Jutland Peninsula. The main one is Zealand, where the capital Copenhagen is located. Close to half of the Danish population live on the island. There are several smaller islands discernible on a map, and the archipelago itself is composed of 1,400 islands and islets. The farthest east is the island of Bornholm, about 180 kilometers from the rest of Denmark, past the southern tip of Sweden, and well into the southwestern part of the Baltic Sea. Denmark has an area of about 43,000 square kilometers, or 16,600 square miles. So it's about the size of the Netherlands or Estonia, or two-thirds the U.S. state of Maryland. Denmark has a population of nearly 6 million, quite similar to its Nordic neighbors, Norway and Finland, and also the American states Colorado and Wisconsin. This puts Denmark at 114th in the world, among nearly 200 countries. Denmark has one of the world's highest standards of living. According to the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook, as of October 2024, Denmark had a GDP per capita of nearly 72,000 US dollars. Among the world's countries, and not including territories, that's good for 9th highest in the world and 6th in Europe. Denmark's largest overseas territory is, of course, Greenland, or Kalathleit Nunat in Greenlandic, the world's largest island and a strategic landmass in the Arctic and the North Atlantic. Greenland is a self-governing territory that runs its domestic affairs, but, not being fully independent, Denmark still has control over its foreign affairs and defense. Canada lies to its west, the United States further down toward the southwest, and Iceland is to its southeast. Greenland's vast expanse, of which 80% is covered in ice, is around 2.16 million square kilometers, or 836,000 square miles. To try to comprehend just how big or immense Greenland is in size, let's bring up some comparisons. Take the 5 largest countries in Western Europe by area, namely France, Spain, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom, and Greenland would still be about 10% larger. Greenland is also bigger than any U.S. state. How about Alaska? Well, Alaska would need to be combined with California to approximate Greenland's size. So, yeah, Greenland's huge. And Greenland, of course, dwarfs Denmark, as the former is 50 times larger in size. Denmark proper is only 133rd in size in the world, but add Greenland, and it leaps far ahead to 12th. Greenland, though, doesn't add much in terms of population, which is approaching 57,000 people, nearly 9/10 of which are native Greenlandic, and which is a bit less than 1% that of Denmark. The polar bear in the room is, if in the future, Greenland would still be for Denmark to patrol, given United States President Donald Trump's avowed goal to acquire Greenland. Denmark's other overseas territory is the Faroe Islands. This small archipelago of 18 islands lies in the North Atlantic, equidistant at 750 kilometers or 470 miles, to Iceland to the northwest, Norway to the east, Scotland and the United Kingdom in its southeast. The Faroe Islands make up an area of 1,400 square kilometers or 540 square miles. The Faroes population is around 53,000. Let's go through selected highlights of Danish history, some events of which still resonate today. The Vikings were a seafaring people who sailed out of Scandinavia from around 700 to 1100 AD to other lands in Europe and also beyond, such as across the Atlantic. The Danes and the other Vikings would go on to grow their own medieval kingdoms. On to the 14th century, Denmark's then Queen Margaret or Margrethe I and her allies hatched a web of plans to bring together the northern kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The result was the Kalmar Union. Norway came with its overseas territories, southern Greenland settlements, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and isles that are today part of Scotland, Orkneys and Shetland. Sweden at the time also included what is now the western half of Finland. The Kalmar Union lasted 126 years, from 1397 to 1523. The union ended when Sweden seceded to chart its own history. This still left Denmark-Norway, separated and joined by a hyphen, as a union of two kingdoms, with Denmark the dominant one. Nearly 200 years later, in 1721, Denmark-Norway sent Lutheran missionary Hans Egil to re-establish settlements and Christianity in southern Greenland, where former Norse settlements had somehow died out. 1721 thus marks the establishment of Greenland as a colony of Denmark-Norway. Almost 100 years later, in 1814, the Treaty of Kiel was signed, which has had a big impact on Denmark, Norway, Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands today. At that time, the northern kingdoms had embroiled themselves in the Napoleonic Wars. On Napoleon's side was Denmark-Norway. Fighting against the French Empire was Sweden. The treaty, concluded a year before the end of the Napoleonic Wars, ceased hostilities between the signatories to the treaty that were involved in the Napoleonic Wars. Denmark also agreed to switch sides and join the anti-French coalition. The agreement resulted in Denmark ceding Norway to Sweden. But what would later prove to be important was that under the 1814 Treaty of Kiel, Denmark kept the Norwegian overseas territories of Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. In 1857, the Copenhagen Convention came into effect, wherein all the Danish straits that flow around Denmark's archipelago became free to use for all commercial shipping. The convention does not cover warships, but they have traditionally been allowed to pass freely, even throughout the Cold War, with conditions imposed by Denmark, such as how many at a time can pass. Into the 20th century, Denmark was a neutral country during the First World War, and the warring parties observed this. In 1917, Denmark sold to the United States a group of islands called the Danish West Indies in the Caribbean, located east of Puerto Rico. These would become the U.S. Virgin Islands. This is notable because, with the sale, the U.S. accepted the condition that they recognize Danish sovereignty over the entirety of another territory much further north, Greenland. During the Second World War, Denmark was among a collection of neutral European countries that Nazi Germany rapidly invaded and occupied. While Norway fell after 2 months, Belgium held out for 18 days. From the Netherlands gave up in 5 days. The invasion of Denmark took only 6 hours. Following the fall of Denmark, and fearing the Germans would then seize the strategic Danish island territories in the North Atlantic, British forces occupied Iceland and the Faroe Islands in May 1940. In June 1941, the British, having to move their troops elsewhere, transferred control of Iceland to the United States, which, for several months more, was still neutral. In 1944, while under the occupation or protection of the Americans, Iceland ended its union with the Danish crown and became an independent republic. Over in Greenland, the United States, while still neutral, rejected British or Canadian occupation of the vast island to prevent a possible German takeover. Instead, in an April 1941 agreement with Denmark, the Americans put Greenland under their protection, while still recognizing Danish sovereignty over the island. When the U.S. became involved in the war following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December that year, American forces expanded their military presence on Greenland. While Greenland had been far removed from previous conflicts in Europe, as aircraft and radar technologies improved greatly, so did Greenland increase in military importance. Greenland was thrust into an increasingly strategic role as an important stepping stone for airborne supplies from the US to Europe, as well as a support site to protect Allied convoys at sea. Denmark remained under German occupation until the end of the Second World War in Europe in May 1945. In 1946, U.S. President Harry Truman, in secret talks, as revealed in archives declassified only decades later, offered to buy Greenland for $100 million in gold. But Denmark said no. The Danish foreign minister then is said to have told the U.S. ambassador, "While we owe much to America, I do not feel that we owe them the whole island of Greenland." The two countries, though, came to an agreement where the Americans obtained access to bases in Greenland that would support U.S. defenses. A few years after the Second World War, against the backdrop of a budding Cold War between the West and the Soviet Union, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden discussed forming a Scandinavian defense union that would not be aligned with either larger power bloc. In April 1948, though, Finland signed a treaty with the Soviet Union wherein Finland, while not obliged to come to the defense of the USSR, was obliged to prevent its territory being used to attack the Soviet Union and to also seek Soviet aid in case of Western attack. Denmark and Norway ultimately decided that a Scandinavian defense union with Sweden could not deter potential Soviet aggression. Sweden, which had remained neutral for more than 200 years, including both world wars, decided to remain non-aligned. In 1949, Denmark, along with Norway and Iceland, became among the 12 founding members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Denmark is one of the 27 members of the European Union. Denmark had originally helped found the European Free Trade Association, or EFTA, in 1960, the rival trade bloc to the earlier established European Economic Community, or EEC. But Denmark left EFTA in 1973 to instead join the EEC, which would evolve into the EU in 1993. Greenland and the Faroe Islands, though, are not part of the EU. Greenland became an EEC member as an overseas territory when Denmark joined, but several years after gaining autonomy, Greenland left the bloc in 1985 over a fisheries dispute. The Faroe Islands, which earned home rule in 1948, elected not to join the EEC when Denmark did, also over a concern with fisheries. Let's look back at Denmark's role during the Cold War. Denmark and the northern part of West Germany were NATO's bulwark, fronting the approach to and from the Baltic Sea. Communist East Germany, Poland, and the USSR, which then included the Baltic states, practically made the Baltic Sea a Warsaw Pact lake, with the exception of territorial waters of neutral Sweden and Finland. During the Cold War, Danish forces operated under NATO's Allied Forces Baltic approaches, or BALTAP, which also included West German forces. They would have been reinforced by American and British forces in case of war. BALTAP was always led by a Danish general or admiral. The command was active from 1962 until its deactivation in 2002, just over a decade after the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. The Royal Danish Army during the Cold War had two divisions equipped with Leopard 1 tanks and M113 APCs. There was a separate battle group garrisoned on the island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea. Denmark also had substantial Home Guard units, spread out across 7 territorial commands. For air power, Denmark was, along with Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway, part of a group called the European Participating Air Forces, or EPAF, that became the first international customers for the U.S.-made F-16 in the late 1970s. The fighters were locally built in Europe. Initial and follow-on orders from the 4 European nations reached more than 500 F-16s. For its part, Denmark ordered a total of 78 in the A and B variants. 61 of the Danish F-16s would undergo a midlife update, or MLU, in the 1990s. The Royal Danish Air Force also operated around 40 Draken fighters, acquired in the 1970s and produced by Swedish company Saab. The Royal Danish Navy focused on threats coming out of the Baltic Sea. It had 2 light frigates, 3 corvettes, 5 coastal submarines, 10 fast missile boats, and half a dozen mine layers. Danish territories in the Arctic and the North Atlantic Ocean also had crucial roles during the Cold War. Greenland is the G in the GIUK, or GIUK Gap, a NATO line of defense that runs north to southeast, from Greenland to Iceland to the United Kingdom, and the bodies of open ocean between those landmasses. During the Cold War, If Soviet naval forces under the Northern Fleet, particularly their hundreds of attack submarines, along with surface combatants, were able to break through from their Arctic bases in northwestern Russia, a hypothetical Cold War turned hot with a rerun of the Battle of the Atlantic would have potentially seen transatlantic sea lines of communications and supply between North America and Europe seriously threatened. Although unnamed in the Guyuk Gap, the Faroe Islands are also of strategic value, as the small archipelago lies between Iceland and the UK. It also lies just inside the Soviet and now Russian bastion defense area. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, particularly with regard to Denmark, threats coming out of the Baltic region appeared to have greatly diminished. Post-Cold War, Denmark, along with most of Europe, reoriented their forces mainly toward expeditionary operations following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, after which the United States invoked, for the first and to date, only time, Article 5, NATO's famous "an attack on one is an attack on all" provision. Danish units were among Allied forces that deployed to Afghanistan from 2002, including from 2006 to 2013 in the fiercely contested Helmand province. Denmark was also among only several countries that supported the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Danish forces deployed there until 2007. In more recent years, Denmark also took part in anti-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. In 2024, Denmark sent a frigate to help protect commercial ships transiting the Red Sea from missile and drone attacks by Houthi militants in Yemen. Denmark has also regularly sent contingents to NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence, or EFP, battle groups in the alliance's eastern flank, particularly in Estonia and Latvia. Denmark has been one of the top supporters of Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. According to the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Denmark has provided a total of 7.8 billion euros worth in bilateral aid to Ukraine from 2022 to 2024, of which 7.1 billion was military aid and 700 million civilian aid. The figures exclude Danish aid via the European Union, to which Denmark is a net contributor. This makes Denmark the seventh largest provider of aid to Ukraine in terms of value, in a list that includes the EU collectively. In Europe, Denmark's aid is behind only two much larger countries, Germany and the United Kingdom. Now let's review the Danish Armed Forces, which have around 20,000 active personnel. The Royal Danish Army is composed of around 8,000 professional soldiers, plus conscripts of a few thousand that could increase to several thousand in the near future. The Army has only two brigades, of which one is a deployable combat brigade, and the other a training brigade. The first brigade is composed of 6,000 soldiers. They are the Royal Danish Army's main reaction force and ground forces contribution to NATO missions. The first brigade is being converted into a heavy unit equipped with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that can be deployed in its entirety as part of a NATO response. The unit's conversion into a heavy brigade is expected to be mostly completed by 2028. Denmark has 44 Leopard 2A7 tanks. The 2A7 configuration includes the longer-barreled L55 cannon, improved protection, and other enhancements, although as of yet, it doesn't include an active protection system. Deliveries were completed in 2023. It has been reported acquiring 9 more of the tanks is being considered. In March 2024, Denmark's Defense Acquisition and Logistics Organization, or DALO, contracted BAE Systems for the midlife update, or MLU, of its current 44 CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles. The hulls will be upgraded and installed with the new D-Series turret, a configuration derived from the Netherlands' MLU of its own CV-90s. The new two-man turret retains a 35mm cannon and adds a twin-tube ATGM launcher, an active protection system, enhanced sensors, and other improvements. In December 2024, BAE Systems announced that they had been contracted to supply Denmark with 115 new CV-90-35 Mark III CIFVs that will also have the new D-Series turret. This was part of a larger deal that also included 50 units for Sweden and 40 units funded by Denmark and Sweden as aid to Ukraine, with delivery of the 115 new Danish CV-90s will be between 2026 to 2029. Denmark's tracked IFV fleet will thus total 159 new and upgraded CV-90-35s. These should be enough to equip up to 3 armored infantry battalions, plus spares in the 1st Brigade, configured as a heavy unit. The Danish Army also operates 308 Prana 5 8-wheeled armored vehicles. The Prana 5s replaced M113 tracked armored personnel carriers and older Piranha 3 8x8s. Denmark also has 183 Eagle 4 and 5 4-wheeled protected vehicles. Denmark pledged to donate to Ukraine their entire arsenal of 19 Caesar 155mm truck-mounted howitzers, ordered from France's Nexter. These were donated even before they had entered Danish service. To replace those, instead of buying new Caesars, the Danes in 2023 turned to Israel's Elbit systems and ordered 19 Atmos howitzers. The Atmos is also a 155mm 52 caliber weapon that's truck-mounted. It has a firing range of up to 40 kilometers with standard rounds. Also notably, Denmark ordered 8 Pulse multiple rocket launchers, from Elbit as well, for a new fires capability at much longer range. Pulse can fire a variety of rockets and missiles contained in 2 sealed pods that, depending on the type, have a range of 35 kilometers up to 300 kilometers. Atmos and Pulse were supposed to enter Danish service in 2024, which was one of the reasons for the order, but this was delayed to 2026. In September 2024, the Danish Defense Ministry contracted German firm Rheinmetall Air Defense to provide 16 Skyranger 30 turrets, along with airburst ammunition that can be used against drones and other short-range aerial threats. These short-range air defense vehicles will mainly support the Danish Army's deployable brigade. But that's it for Denmark's ground-based air defense. They currently only have man-portable air defense systems that can reach out to a few kilometers. The Danish Defense Ministry, though, in March 2025, announced plans to fast-track the acquisition of ground-based air defense systems for long-range, or up to 150 kilometers, and medium range, or around 40 kilometers. In a 2-phase plan, initial systems should be delivered by 2025 to 2026, and full implementation by 2028. Meanwhile, the Royal Danish Army's 2nd Brigade is tasked with training a wide range of Army personnel, from light reconnaissance units to drone operators, to vehicle crews to young conscripts. As for the Danish Armed Forces elite units, these are grouped under the Special Operations Command, or SOCOM with a K. These include the Danish Army Special Forces, or Jaeger Corps, the JGK, and the Danish Navy Special Forces, or Frogman Corps, the FRK, each with around 150 personnel. The SOCOM is supported by Special Operations-capable Air Force units. SOCOM also includes the Serious Dog Sled Patrol. Think long-range recon and sovereignty patrols in hardcore Arctic conditions in Greenland, typically in pairs with a dozen or so Greenlandic sled dogs. This, the unique Danish Arctic Special Forces unit, is composed of force with 12 men in total every year, plus their hardy canine companions, and supported by station specialists. This is Defense Index. If you find you like the content, please like and subscribe. As of 2024, the Royal Danish Air Force still had around 30 aging F-16s that underwent a midlife update, or MLU, in the 1990s. Denmark has pledged 19 of its retiring F-16s as part of military aid to Ukraine. Denmark also sold 24 other F-16s to Argentina in 2024. The replacement aircraft will be the F-35A, produced by U.S. defense giant Lockheed Martin, with 27 of the stealthy strike fighters having been ordered. 11 are believed to have been delivered as of 2024, and all 27 F-35 Lightning IIs ordered should be in service by 2027. These give Denmark highly capable combat aircraft, although these comprise quite a small force. In March 2023, the Air Force commanders of Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden signed a letter of intent to create a joint Nordic Air Command. Finland has ordered 64 F-35s to replace its aging FA-18 CD Hornets. Norway has also ordered 52 F-35s to replace its own retired F-16 MLUs. Sweden is the only country in the Nordic force that has not ordered F-35s, but it will have a planned fleet of 120 Gripen produced by Swedish company Saab. Eventually, 60 will be in the latest E model, which should start to enter Swedish service by 2025, and the other 60 will be in-service CD models that will be retained. By around 2030, the four Nordic countries expect to have among them 143 stealthy F-35As and 120 Gripen for a total of 263 combat aircraft. Denmark's 27 F-35s will account for the smallest share in this force. The combined count of modern strike fighters of Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden under the Joint Nordic Air Command will be larger than that of other major individual European NATO air forces, including those of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy. The Royal Danish Air Force has 4 Challenger CL-604 twin-jet aircraft produced by Canadian company Bombardier. 3 have been modified for maritime surveillance, equipped with radar and an electro-optical infrared sensor. These have taken part in missions such as Arctic patrols over Greenland and in counter-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. 1 Challenger is used for the VIP and transport role. The Danish Air Force also operates 4 C-130J-30 Hercules transport aircraft that were acquired in the early 2000s. The helicopter wing operates 14 AW-101 Merlin 3-engine large-medium helicopters that are configured for transport and search and rescue. The Merlins mainly operate off the Danish Air Force's main base in Karup, in mid-Jutland, but these can also be embarked with the Danish Navy's frigates. There are also 9 MH-60R Seahawk maritime helicopters that started to enter service in 2017. Originally acquired for maritime surveillance, these have in recent years been upgraded with dipping sonar, sonobuoy launchers, and torpedoes for anti-submarine warfare. And there are 11 AS-550 C-2 Fennec light utility helicopters. Denmark does not operate attack helicopters or larger heavy-lift helicopters. In early 2024, funds were allocated for the procurement of long-range uncrewed aircraft systems, for surveillance, intelligence gathering, and for asserting sovereignty in the Arctic and the North Atlantic. During and shortly after the Cold War, Denmark had a mainly coastal navy, but it upsized its ships in the 21st century and now currently has 9 ocean-going vessels. The Royal Danish Navy's ship count includes 3 air defense frigates, 2 frigates that are also capable of transport, and 4 offshore patrol vessels. As a small navy that seeks to perform multiple tasks with a modest amount of ships, the Danish Navy has pioneered modularity in its vessels. This can be traced back to near the end of the Cold War in the late 1980s with Standflex, which is a modular mission payload system wherein weapons and equipment mounted in standardized containers. The Standflex concept has served the Danish Navy's needs well, such that these are still used on their currently serving larger frigates that can accommodate multiple Standflex modules. The Royal Danish Navy's premier surface combatants are 3 Ewe Huitfeldt-class air defense frigates that all entered service in 2011. These 6,600-ton ships were derived from the Absalon-class transport-capable frigates. Major changes include the installation of the Active Phased Array Radar, or APAR, and the SMART-L long-range surveillance radar. A 32-cell Mark 41 vertical launch system, or VLS, was installed midships for SM-2 anti-air missiles. A significant change was also in propulsion, as this ship class have 4 engines instead of the 2 in the Absalon class. The Ewe Huitfeldt hull design, known as the Arrowhead 140, and with some different sensors and weapon systems, has also been successfully marketed to other navies. It is the basis for the United Kingdom's 5-ship Type 31 or Inspiration-class frigates, plus 3 similar ships for Poland and 2 for Indonesia. As mentioned earlier, the Ewe Huitfeldt class are derived from the Absalon class, which are 2 ships commissioned in 2004 and 2005. These were originally designated as flexible support ships, but were reclassified as frigates in 2020. The Absalon class, which displays 6,600 tons at full load, are fitted with weapons expected of frigates, such as Harpoon anti-ship missiles, ESSM for anti-air, torpedoes, a 127mm or 5-inch gun, and a pair of 35mm autocannons. What makes them unique for frigates is that they have substantial cargo capacity that allow them to transport boats, vehicles, and troops. These can carry ISO containers, or 200 troops, or up to 55 vehicles, including 7 main battle tanks. There's also space midships for up to 5 Standflex weapons modules. There's a large aft helicopter landing deck and hangars for up to 2 Merlins or Seahawks, and landing craft can be launched astern. German company Atlas Elektronik was selected in February 2025 to upgrade the Absalon-class frigates with a towed sonar array to significantly improve their submarine detection capability. A version of the Absalon class will be the basis for Singapore's planned 6-ship class of MRCV or multi-role combat vessels. Denmark also operates 4 Thetis-class ocean-going patrol vessels, or OPVs, in which the Danish Navy designates as inspection ships. The Thetis class each displace 3,500 tons and are relatively lightly armed, with a 76mm main gun plus some machine guns. They conduct sovereignty patrols, fisheries inspection, and search and rescue, operating mainly in the waters around Greenland and the Faroe Islands. While not dedicated icebreakers, the Thetis class have reinforced hulls that can break through 80 centimeters, or just over 2.5 feet thick of ice. These ships are getting old, having all entered service in the early 1990s. The Defense Acquisition and Logistics Organization, or DALO, selected Danish consortium Danske Flådeskib to design and build the replacement vessels, where the Thetis class are lightly armed patrol vessels that were also intended to maintain the Arctic as a so-called low-tension region. A proposed design for the replacements could see vessels equipped, if needed, for anti-ship and anti-submarine warfare, while maintaining that crucial Arctic capability. During and shortly after the Cold War, the Danish Navy operated a few small coastal submarines, but have lost that submarine capability since those vessels' retirement in the early 2000s. Denmark and Germany have also been working together on what's called the ARC Agreement, which secures access to 5 roll-on, roll-off, or ro-ro ships to meet German and Danish defense shipping needs. The vessels are chartered to other countries or the commercial market if there are no German and Danish defense shipping needs in that time. The Home Guard is considered the 4th arm of the Danish armed forces. It is composed of volunteer soldiers, and there are 13,000 active volunteers and 30,000 reserves. Home Guard units take part in activities such as guarding Danish waters, infrastructure protection, and providing support to the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, or Frontex, disaster management, and the police. Denmark's financial framework and the political guidelines for its defense concerns are inscribed in what it calls the Danish Defense Agreement, approved by a broad majority in Denmark's parliament. The most recent one, agreed in June 2023, sets out the general policies over a 10-year period in the Danish Defense Agreement of 2024 to 2033. A key change is where Denmark would focus. The new defense agreement, quote, reorientates Denmark's foreign and security policy from maintaining a presence in the world's hotspots to a greater emphasis on the areas surrounding the 3 regions of the Kingdom of Denmark, unquote. The agreement emphasizes that NATO is, and will remain, the backbone of Denmark's security. As is now widely known, NATO members had committed to spend the equivalent of at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. In 2024, 23 out of 32 NATO members were at 2% or more of GDP. Denmark was one of the chronic underspenders from 2014 to 2022, ranging anywhere from 1.11 to 1.37%. The Danish Defense Agreement of 2024 to 2033 set out the goal of reaching 2% of GDP in defense spending by 2030. However, in 2023, the Danish government included military aid to Ukraine in calculating their defense spending, and voila, they hit 2.01% that year. Critics of the move have called the calculation creative accounting. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen countered that supporting Ukraine is part of defending Denmark. Doing so again in 2024, Danish defense spending was officially reported at 2.37% of GDP. Military aid to Ukraine in the 2 years account for a quarter of reported Danish defense spending. Not including Ukraine aid, Danish defense spending would have stood at 1.4 to 1.5% of GDP. In February 2025, Denmark announced an increase in its defense budget by a total of 50 billion kroner, or 6.7 billion euros, or 7 billion US dollars, over 2025 and 2026. This would bring Danish defense spending to 3.2% of GDP, which is calculated to include military aid to Ukraine, but the increase is significant enough that it would push Denmark well over NATO's 2% threshold, even if its Ukraine aid is not counted. The extra funding is meant to address urgent needs in Danish defense, including the glaring hole in longer-range surface-to-air missile systems. Prime Minister Frederiksen said, "There is one message for the Chief of Defense: buy, buy, buy." She added that the procurement would be fast-tracked. If we can't get the best equipment, buy the next best. There's only one thing that counts now, and that is speed, the Danish leader said. Denmark is one of the few European countries that did not suspend conscription. Denmark, though, replaced universal male conscription with what has been called the Scandinavian model of conscription, as it is similar to that practiced by Norway and Sweden, wherein only a small proportion of the cohort of, in Denmark's case, young men who turn 18, are conscripted, and thus most, and in recent years, actually all turn out to be volunteers. Young women can also volunteer to undergo conscript training. In 2024, Denmark had nearly 4,700 conscripts, of whom just over 3/4 were male and 1/4 female. According to the Danish Defense Ministry, 100% of the male conscripts were, like the female conscripts, volunteers. In March 2024, the Danish government announced that by 2026, the number of conscripts would increase to 5,000, and, also notably, young women will be eligible to be conscripted as well, as has been the case in neighboring Norway and Sweden. Denmark has maintained strong military ties with its Nordic neighbors, and with the accession into NATO of Finland in 2023 and Sweden in 2024, these ties have only deepened. Even before that, since 2009, NATO allies Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, along with then non-aligned Finland and Sweden, have been part of a group called Nordic Defense Cooperation, or NORDEFCO, where they coordinated capabilities enhancement, training, and even contingency planning. The accession of Finland and Sweden into NATO has turned the Baltic Sea what has been called a NATO lake. Sweden and Finland now line the northern coasts and islands, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania on the eastern coasts, Poland and Germany on the southern coasts, and on the southwestern side, astride the only natural exit and entry, lies Denmark. All these counties mentioned being NATO allies. Russia stands alone in the region, with its Kaliningrad exclave between Lithuania and Poland, and on the eastern end of the Gulf of Finland, the body of water between that country and Estonia, lies Russia's second city of St. Petersburg. The Baltic Sea has seen a spate of suspected hybrid warfare activities, in particular the cutting of undersea cables in the relatively shallow body of water, which has an average depth of 55 meters or 180 feet. In response, in January 2025, NATO launched a new military activity called Baltic Sentry, which involves the deployment of a range of assets, including frigates, aircraft, and drones to monitor and protect critical infrastructure in the region. Denmark is a participating country, along with all other NATO allies in the Baltic region. The importance of Greenland and the Faroe Islands has persisted after the end of the Cold War and, in the foreseeable future, with tensions having risen sharply since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and with increased Russian naval activities in the Arctic and the North Atlantic Ocean. Greenland remains the massive northern anchor of defense along the Guyuk Gap. Since the end of the Cold War, while asserting sovereignty over Greenland and hosting the United States' northernmost military base, Denmark had attempted to keep the area around Greenland as a so-called low-tension region and had avoided heavier militarization of the strategic island. In recent years, though, since apparent Russian assertiveness in the Arctic, there have been considerations on strengthening the patrols in Greenland. In 2012, Denmark formed the Joint Arctic Command following the merger of Island Command Greenland and Island Command Faroes. Realistically, though, Denmark by itself cannot be expected to defend the vastness of Greenland if, hypothetically, Russia's northern fleet came over to try and take it, or if a nearby superpower did so, for that matter. The northernmost permanent U.S. military installation is located in northwestern Greenland, long known as Thule Air Base. Since it was built in 1943, it was renamed the Bidufik Space Base, after the region's indigenous name and as it is now operated by the U.S. Space Force that took over the installation in 2020. Apart from an active airfield, the base hosts extensive radar installations that can track intercontinental ballistic missiles. At its peak in the Cold War, there were up to 10,000 personnel in the base, but in recent years, there are a total of 600 U.S. and Danish military personnel, as well as contractors. And so we come to the latest, most assertive push yet by America to acquire Greenland. President Donald Trump broached his own concept, as he called it, in 2019, during his first term.
So the concept came up, and I said, certainly strategically it's interesting. It's not number one on the burner, I can tell you that. Actually, it's a large real estate deal.
And it was generally met with surprise and bemusement. When Trump won a second non-consecutive term in late 2024, he revived the idea, but instead of calling it a real estate deal, he called it an absolute necessity, to which he would add something needed for national security purposes. That the issue has been raised to become a matter of national security, or an existential issue for a nation, has made Trump's latest attempt to buy Greenland a much more serious matter. Shortly after, Denmark announced additional spending equivalent to $1.5 billion to boost Greenland's defense. Danish Defense Minister Truls Lund Poulsen called the timing of the announcement an irony of fate. Probably true, though, as 2 inspection ships, drones, and extra dog sled teams won't exactly deter the superpower. In early January 2025, in response to a reporter's question, Trump commented that he could not rule out the use of force to acquire Greenland. In March 2025, in a speech before the U.S. Congress, President Trump reiterated that the U.S. is determined to acquire Greenland.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
For its part, Denmark has reiterated that Greenland is not for sale, and that ultimately, it's up to the Greenlanders to decide. Greenland's government has stated the same, further stressing that if there's any negotiation, it must be done with Greenland and not with Denmark. Greenlanders, through their elected officials, have repeatedly stated that we do not want to be Danish, we do not want to be American. We want to be Greenlanders. In March 2025, a party that favored a gradual path to independence from Denmark won the most votes in elections held in that time. In response to President Trump's pronouncements for the U.S. to acquire the island, the leaders of all 6 Greenlandic parties that ran in the elections signed a joint statement a few days later, stating that they, quote, find this conduct unacceptable to friends and allies in a defense alliance, unquote. While independence is the stated goal of all but one of Greenland's current political parties, only the second-place party pledged an accelerated path. The other political parties, including the one that topped the elections, have not indicated when this will be achieved. An opinion poll in January 2025 showed 85% of Greenlanders opposed joining the U.S., with only 6% in favor. Polling in 2025 had also showed that 84% of Greenlanders would support independence from Denmark, but also that 45% would oppose independence if it meant a lower standard of living. Denmark, after all, provides subsidies worth around 500 million euros, which is equivalent to half of Greenland's annual budget. Under a self-rule law adopted by Greenland and Denmark in 2009, Greenland can declare independence if it is approved in a local referendum, although it comes with the condition that it must still be agreed with by the Danish parliament. A looming issue for a suddenly independent Greenland, though, is that it will no longer be part of NATO, or at the very least, not right away, even if they want to. Also assuming the NATO alliance stays as is. This removes the complication of 2 allies coming into conflict if there were a U.S. invasion of Denmark-held Greenland. Is it really conceivable that U.S. troops that regularly do cold weather training with their allies be ordered to use their power and know-how to invade Greenland? No matter how unimaginable it had once been, it has to be presumed that there is a non-zero chance of it happening. Or alternatively, would America be satisfied with supporting an independent Greenland militarily and economically, say in exchange for exclusive rights to mineral deposits? Whether Greenland keeps the status quo with Denmark, becomes independent, or is incorporated into the U.S., we can only watch what happens in the future, possibly in the near future. Meanwhile, the Faroe Islands is an unmentioned but still essential part of the Guyuk Gap, with the United Kingdom to its southeast and Iceland to its northwest. The Faroes also fall just within the bastion defense of former Soviet and now Russian doctrine, where they envision denying access to the area to their NATO adversaries in case of an armed conflict. In 2022, Denmark and the Faroe Islands agreed to establish an air surveillance radar with a range of 400 kilometers or nearly 250 miles. This would allow the monitoring of activity in the area between the United Kingdom and Iceland. To conclude, Denmark is indeed strategically situated as a small country at the northern crossroads of Europe, and also with its two similarly strategic overseas territories. The Danish armed forces have modern equipment but are small in size. It is clear that its membership in NATO is the backbone of its defense. Developments in recent years, particularly Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, has caused Denmark to reorient its defense toward the defense of the country, its territories, and to contribute to the defense of its allies in Europe. Denmark greatly relies on its NATO allies for the defense of its vast, self-governing territory of Greenland, as well as the much smaller Faroe Islands, as these are of value not only to the Danish realm, but also critical to protecting transatlantic sea lines of communications and supply. An unexpected but unavoidable concern has emerged, though, with President Donald Trump apparently determined in his pursuit of the U.S. acquisition of Greenland. This is an issue between NATO allies that must be resolved. So, that's it for now. If you want to see more content about defense issues, yes, please, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you and see you in the other videos here on Defense Index.